Have you encountered the Dogman? This world is a strange one. There are werewolves who are cursed people that have no control over their bestial forms, and they crave flesh. And then there's the Dogman, a creature that is something of its own. I've heard it said that they are Native American spirits that take the form of half men, half dogs, while others believe they are bizarre, horrid creatures. There's just something disturbing about a man-dog hybrid that would leave anyone mortified at the sight of it. So close the blinds out of fear of what might be peeking in. Here are 5 real Dogman encounters. Let's get ready for some nightmares. Number 1. Life Lesson. Submitted by Goku for Life. My name is Stefan. I'm almost 6 foot and I'm almost 14. Me and my best friend Brett live in a real ratchet community, and me and him are tough kids. That's just because we had to be. Where we live, the most uncommon things are common, but this run-in was so bizarre and terrifying that it scared us both, maybe Brett even more. Brett and I have a real rowdy type of humor that may ruffle others. Now Brett is much more tough than me, but shorter, like I mean a lot. One day, Brett and I were playing basketball at a very dark 5 p.m. when our friends said they wanted to play. Brett asked if we could go get another ball from his house close by the court. I agreed as we went on our way. This path is the way he uses to get to school, as I know because I often go with him. But that's during the daytime. This was pure dark, and it took on a creepy vibe. As we went on, we started to hear a noise, kind of like a dog barking, but it was much wheezier. Brett sucker punched me out of nowhere and said that it was just his fat grandma, and we laughed. But I still couldn't help feeling a bit uneasy. I had never heard a dog sound like that before. As we went on, that joke faded right into fear as we heard some leaves rustling behind us. My head whips back around naturally and I see a dog's legs. I immediately thought it was a lack of light because I was only seeing 2 of the legs. Little did I know that it was not the lighting that was the problem. I bumped into Brett on the shoulder and he groaned. We're almost there. We made it to the house and I just realized what I did wrong. My mom was supposed to pick me up that night, and I was not allowed anywhere near Brett's house. She didn't really approve of him, so I'd be in a lot of trouble if she came by and saw that I wasn't there. I told Brett that I remembered that, and he replied that we could take an ATV back. So we quickly grabbed a ball and got in the vehicle. It was really nice and even had a roof on it. I could not stop thinking about that weird dog thing, but it was easy to brush off as we weren't on foot this time. We took off down the trail going a little too fast, hitting tree branches and the like as we were underage drivers. We just had to have fun with everything. As we were almost there, the ATV stopped. Brett said that there is something blocking the way. Of course, due to our usual humor, I was the one moving it. This thing was gray and the headlights made it look furry. It also looked very heavy, so I grabbed a crowbar from the trailer bed, and I walked towards the thing, thinking it was some sort of mossy rock. I slid the crowbar under it, and it growled like an angry dog. But this was way too big to be some dog. It uncurled into this creature, then stood up with gray ragged fur and hellish red eyes, and in those red eyes were yellow pupils. It opened a large, sharp mouth, and as it did, it unleashed a roar that ripped through the sound of the ATV's engine. I dropped the F-bomb and hit it with the crowbar, but that only made it angrier. I ran and I jumped back into the ATV. Brett hit the accelerator and rammed the thing as it ran on 2 big dog legs, then switched to 4 as it hit the brush. The 2 of us were mortified and we raced back to the court. We got out of the ATV and sat on the court, wondering what the hell just happened. Our friend stood there staring at us, wondering what we were doing. It took us a long time to get out of that ATV. I admit we were pretty confused as much as we were scared. Eventually, we got out of the ATV. We sat on the court and told all our friends that were there, who immediately after hearing all wanted to leave. Brett was white as flour and told me to walk to school with him the next day. I don't blame him. Ever since that night, Brett and I have been scared to go on the trail in the back of the old football field and basketball court. As I said before, we told all of our friends about the encounter, but our friend Nick wanted to go back there at night. I think he wanted to see it for himself. After school, the 3 of us started on the trek, and just thinking about going back on that trail gave us chills. Nick, being either brave or stupid, wanted to go off the trail. into the woods, but me and Brett refused. Sadly, we didn't follow through. That's the mistake that we still regret. The night was very still and quiet, and the super moon peeking through the night sky made me shiver. Right now typing this, I'm shivering thinking of the creature. The Dogman got our presence because howls often ripped through the woods as we sped up. Rustling noises were around us as well. We shouldn't have gotten off the trail, I know that now. As I did before, Nick dropped F-bombs left and right as he cried like the fool who got us lost. And sure enough, the Dogman himself appeared in front of us. We shone our flashlight on it, and it was as frightening of a thing as I remembered. I swear all the color in the three of us drained at the sight of this thing, and its nasty gray fur and the face that was like a wolf's head. Its lips curled back and it began to snarl. We took off. I made a foolish choice to look back at the thing as we ran for our lives. This Dogman was foaming from the mouth on all fours with its ears pointed and eyes illuminated. We were now bolting into the football field and trying our best to make it into the basketball court where some other kids were. When I looked back again, the Dogman turned to the woods, and at the moment we reached the court, he zipped back into the forest. These kids all knew our story and knew what we were doing. They ended up fist bumping us and laughing, but me, Brett, and Nick were not laughing at all, and we were done for the night. Number 2. Dogman by the Train Tracks. Submitted by ARIELBLONSKI. This happened around 2 or 3 months ago. I live in Canada, and this happened on a very cold night. Family had come in from America recently, so the night this happened, my family was exhausted and were sleeping. I was playing on my phone when my friend texted me, asking if I wanted to go to the woods with her. Of course, I said yes. I'll be there in 5 minutes. It sounds weird, but we enjoyed walking around in the woods, especially after dark. I got my shoes on and I left the house. My friend was outside waiting for me, and we began walking into the nearby woods. Just for some background, I am a 13-year-old girl, and I was never scared of anything in the woods really. I never had a reason to be. These woods were right next to my house after all, so I grew up around them. We were just walking and fooling around like normal teenagers do. We were beginning to get close to the train tracks when I got a feeling I was being watched. I brushed it off thinking that it was just that feeling of being in the dark. I think we all know that feeling. That's when I heard a loud crunch from beside us. We looked toward the noise, and there, not too far from us, was a big pair of red eyes. They looked like they were bulging out of their sockets. They were glaring at us from the nearby bushes. I was so horrified at that moment that I'm shaking now just retelling this story. Both of us stood there, frozen in fear. I was looking in the thing's blood-red eyes. Then this creature stood up on its hind legs, towering over us at about 7 feet tall. It had light gray hair everywhere, but its face looked canine, and its eyes looked eerily human. I mean, even its fingers were like a person's, except for the 5-inch claws at the tips. I glanced over to my friend, and in shock I saw that she was no longer there. She had taken off, faster than I've ever seen her. Then I looked back at the thing. Its lips were curled back in a vicious snarl. Finally, I pushed myself to run. I knew running from it would only make it chase after me, but I just kept running. And I couldn't help but look behind me, and this thing was in fact giving chase, and it was catching up fast. I could feel my heart pounding painfully in my chest, and I ran as fast as I possibly could, my vision going blurry around the edges, which I can only assume is the adrenaline pumping through my body. When I finally made it out of those woods, my friend was there actually waiting on me, if you could believe that after her taking off. But she had a look of pure terror on her face. She said, "I thought you were going to die." I couldn't reply, so we just sprinted home. She only lived 3 houses down closer to the city, and she walked me home. She lived close enough that, though I offered to walk her home first, she said she'd be fine. And being scared out of my mind, I was okay with that. When I made it back home, I locked every door in the house, and I walked right up into my room wondering what the hell just happened. There was no way I was getting to sleep that night. Every little noise kept me up, and about an hour later after lying in bed, I heard a howl from behind my house. It was loud and way too close. I jumped in fear out of my bed and walked downstairs to my parents' room. They were awake as well, and they asked me if I had heard it too. I said yes. Now, every so often, me and my friend talk about that night, and we always think of things that thing could have been. But I can't help but think about that big bright full moon that was out on the very same night. Number 3. The Howl, submitted by Justin G. Let me start off by saying I never saw anything, no glowing eyes, no suspicious silhouette, just a very bizarre and strange howling. I live in Iowa, and while I was not born here, I have now lived the majority of my life here. I live in a small but active town of around 10,000 or so people. We have shopping centers, tons of fast food chains, and many other conveniences within walking distance. The tale I'm sharing now took place some time ago, around the summer of 2009. I had lived in my parents' house for a few years, and was very comfortable walking everywhere I needed to go. I couldn't afford a car, and I preferred being up at night as opposed to daytime, so walking never really bothered me. I must have walked near every street in our town at night, mostly just bored with nothing else to do, but rarely sneaking to a girlfriend's house. The point I'm getting at is I was never afraid of my town nor the dark. I knew every inch. I was a night owl. The dark was comforting, the silence, the cool air, it just suited me better. However, one night was different. I was bored and decided to walk down to the nearest gas station to buy some candy. I didn't have anything in mind, I was more interested in having something to do than the candy itself. It was one of those nights that I just felt restless. Yet, even before I left the house that night, something felt off. I had a funny feeling that I should have stayed inside. The feeling was nagging at me, but I shook it off as my mind just messing with me, for lack of a better term for it. I got dressed and grabbed my wallet, and I slowly made my way outside, careful as to not wake my parents. It was late at night, well past midnight. I had been watching Adult Swim and gotten bored when they began running the shows from earlier that night, so it must have been after 2 in the morning. Soon as I got outside, my sense of there being something wrong went through the roof, yet I still refused to believe what my mind was telling me. I have a bit of OCD, and over the years I've learned to ignore a lot of my feelings and urges, as they were typically just nonsense. But I see now that that night was different. I began walking down the block, but something told me not to go the quickest way, so I gave in to my OCD and took the longer route. It was not a huge increase in distance and time, and if it shut my mind up, I was happy to do it. Even taking the long way, I felt a general unease. The night seemed wrong for some reason. Normally I feel at home in the night, but this night I felt very much out of place. Just the uneasy feeling made me uneasy. Actually, to think of it, everything else felt odd too. It was oddly silent. There were no stray cars down the street on the highway. There were no crickets even making any noise. Not an animal in sight. At this time of night, it's very common to see cats and dogs roaming freely, along with wild creatures like the occasional possum or raccoon. But not tonight. I quickly made it down the 3 blocks to the gas station, and once I was there, I felt worse. Here I was surrounded by light and the store clerk who was struggling to stay awake. But it was just not right. I felt like it was a mistake coming out of the cover of darkness. I couldn't help but feel like something could see me now. I bought some Starburst and quickly left the gas station. I just wanted to get home right now, but at the same time I did not want to go back into the dark. Courage prevailed for once, however, as I took off up the street toward my house, even taking the quick route. I make it halfway home, over by a couple of local businesses. In between them was an alley. That alley caught my attention. It seemed so out of place for some reason. I'd walked past it a million times, but tonight it seemed wrong, just as everything else did that night. As I got closer, my urge to run grew and grew, but I just kept a steady walking pace towards it. But I managed to walk right past the alley without incident. But no more than 10 feet away from it, I could hear trash cans tipping over way down at the other end. It was a good distance from me, but it still seemed odd. I hoped it was a wild animal or a cat, but as I stood there waiting, I heard the worst howl I've ever heard. It was definitely no dog or coyote. It was a deep, guttural howl, the kind that instantly makes your brain conjure images of a werewolf or the infamous Dogman. I backed away, eyes still toward the valley. Soon I was running backwards. Finally, I turned and bolted to my house. Once at the door, I looked around, worried at what was out there, worried that something may have followed me. Yet there was nothing, so I quickly unlocked my door and got back in. I did not go out in the dark for quite a while after that, but when I finally did venture back out, everything was normal again. Animals were running around, crickets were making themselves known, and the night became home once more. Still though, I will never forget that howl. Number 4. It Tried to Kill Me. Submitted by ANAKIN. My friend and I were on our way to the campsite, actually a cabin in the woods we had rented out. We were finally out on a weekend camping trip we had been planning. When we got to the cabin, we were at least a few miles away from any nearby cities, which is the way I like it. Let me give you a little bit of information first. I was born in Michigan, and I've heard all too well the legend of the Dogman. It's a dog-like animal that would stand up on its hind legs. Anyway, later that night, my friend and I could not sleep, so we just decided to go out walking the quiet, dark trails of the woods. We ended up talking about, actually more joking about, some old personal stories that embarrassed us. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we heard a low howl. It reminded me of the howl from American Werewolf in London in the most disturbing way. We were immediately spooked, and we began to head back to camp. Then we heard some branches snapping on my left. Out of instinct, I shot my gaze in that direction, and I caught sight of 2 large, bright, yellow eyes. Not thinking, we shone our flashlights right at it, and it snarled at us. My friend completely lost it and gunned it back to camp, but when I tried to run, the thing leaped at me and forced me to the ground. My first thought was my knife, which I always kept on me, but I never honestly had to use it before for something like this. It all happened so fast. I slid my knife out of my pocket and popped it open in such a rapid and clumsy way that I had accidentally cut the creature, though I was planning on doing worse to get away. It released me, and I quickly broke into a sprint back to the cabin. When I made it back, I locked the door and looked out the window, and that's when I saw the worst. This creature was running towards the door I had just locked, and that's when I got a better look at the thing. It was large with an elongated snout and pointed ears. I would have honestly mistaken it as a bear if its body wasn't so toned and lacking hair. Not to mention those eyes, which just didn't match up to its animal-like body. It rammed the door once, and a loud thud rang throughout the cabin. And then everything fell quiet. I had jumped back when I saw it running toward the cabin, so I leaned back over to the window to see where it was, only to see its vicious, snarling face inches away from mine. I almost fell over onto the floor. Luckily, it backed away and proceeded into the woods. My friend and I were left there, dumbfounded and looking at each other like, what the hell was that thing? We have to get out of here now. The problem with that, though, was the fact that we had walked here since we lived only a few miles away, and there was no way we were walking back out. We discussed calling 911, but we weren't harmed. We honestly had no idea what to do, so we ended up just sitting in the living area, looking out the windows, hoping that that thing did not come back. Eventually, I got the courage to go back toward the window to get a better look, and I could make out several pairs of those same yellow eyes at the tree line. Something inside of my head told me to go outside, to leave the cabin, to walk into the woods. I shook it off, completely bewildered as to what I was thinking. We both waited out until sunlight finally shone through the windows. The walk back to town was both quiet and terrifying. Later, the two of us ended up discussing this encounter, and we concluded that it must have been the Dogman. What really scares me, though, was how close I got to this thing, that I had to defend myself from something most people only barely glimpsed. Somewhere out there, my knife is lying on the forest floor with that thing's blood on it, and I'll be damned if I ever want to go back for it. And number 5. Dogman in the Woods. Submitted by Michael L. For reasons of anonymity, I will not be sharing mine or my friends' names. Let's just call my friends L, R, and F. We were all the same age at around 14. We were biking in northern Minnesota, on a trail practically in the middle of nowhere, besides our cabin about 15 miles away from where we were biking. Now here's something worth mentioning. Me and my friends are all over 6 feet tall and we're very strong for our age. We had been biking for maybe an hour now and the trail began to thin, so we had to ride in line with each other. I was in the back, with L, F, and R in front of me in that order. The trail was now so thin that we had to lift our legs off the pedals at certain points to avoid getting cut on sharp, jagged, and dead branches. The trail began to dip down the mountain that R's cabin was on, and we were so caught up in the trail that we never realized that we had passed the 30 miles away from home flag pinned to a tree. That marker was the last marker on the trail. We stopped in a clearing just off the trail, and by now it was probably 8 at night. We made a fire and hunted a rabbit to share with each other. After we ate and talked for a while, I checked my watch, and it was about 10 p.m. The way R's father signaled us to come back was by lighting a bonfire. When we saw it, we packed our stuff and began biking back up the mountain. At about the 20-mile marker from home, we all heard a deep growl in the woods and stopped. Elle asked, "Did you hear that?" in a shaky voice. We all responded silently by nodding our heads. We then heard a weird screech as this massive creature came leaping out of the woods at us. The thing was about 15 feet away and it towered over us, maybe 7 feet tall. Now this next part sounds bizarre, but it's the best way I can describe it. The thing had muscular legs like a dog's and the torso of a deer. Its arms resembled a human's, but the hands and claws were that of a bear and the head of a coyote. R pulled out his .22 caliber handgun and turned the safety off. I think the creature either recognized the gun or knew it was bad, because he lunged at R and tackled him to the ground. R was just screaming so loud. The worst part was the creature was also screaming. It was the same pitch and tone as R, like the creature was mocking him while tearing him apart. I finally just snapped out of my trance-like state, staring at what was happening. I pulled out my .308 hunting rifle and yelled at it to get the hell off of him. I fired a nervous shot that I had no idea if it landed. The thing didn't even flinch. He just stopped and looked at me with the most hatred I've ever seen before in my life. He snapped his claws at me and tore a gash in my face down to my cheekbone. R's father was only 5 miles away. He was walking down the trail looking for us when he heard us screaming. When he got there and saw R's condition, he just knelt down by him and prayed that everything was going to be okay. R's face was scratched up pretty bad and his coat was shredded, revealing a scratch and torn chest. The creature, which had run off into the woods, sounded about 400 feet away now. The roar was so loud it just echoed throughout the whole mountain. R's dad, when he heard the roar, picked up R and threw him on his back. He yelled to me, L, and F to ride up to the cabin as fast as possible. When we got back, we called the police and paramedics with the landline phone he had in his cabin. We got back at midnight and we still hadn't seen anything of R and his father at 2 in the morning. R and his father ended up having to be hospitalized. And the rest of us were scarred for life about the woods. I mean, who wouldn't be? Everyone chalked this up to a bear attack, which is pretty reasonable, I guess. But what we saw did not look like a bear, unless somehow we were so scared that we demonized this creature. Either way, it's been 15 years since then, and I still have not gone back in the woods ever since. Though the Dogman seems more intelligent or maybe human-like than werewolves, it can still be a daunting and terrifying creature to behold, especially when you happen upon one in the woods at night. Sometimes they attack, and sometimes they simply stalk, but I don't think any of us want to know what would happen if one of them got too close. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your own true scary stories today at darknessprevails.org/submit. Thanks.